This happened in early 2017. I was a 23-year-old girl and had just finished college. The field I studied was not huge in my area, so I decided to leave. I moved to the biggest city in our country to make a post-graduation course and look for a job. As I was still unemployed, I decided I would wait to make a long-term rental contract, worrying about a possible bad commute to work. In the first couple of months, I was switching from Airbnbs and hostels all the time. I was already tired of this. I decided this would be my last move, and then, with or without a job, I would settle. I was running out of money and decided to stay in a dorm in a hostel next to where I was taking classes. Sharing a bedroom is not a problem to me during a trip, but when you're living somewhere, trying to create a routine, sharing a bathroom with some complete strangers just sucks. I would share the dorm with 3 guys, but it's not with any of them that my bad encounter occurs. They were nice, apart from one of them snoring so bad at night. No biggie. In another dorm, although, was the creepiest person I've ever seen. He was in his mid-30s, and he was not traveling. He was native from the city where we were in, and was using the hostel as a new house since his parents kicked him out of theirs. He introduced himself and tried to be nice and flirty with me. I was polite initially, but declined his advances. He wouldn't stop. He started following me all day long in the hostel. Anywhere I went, he would show up in less than 5 minutes. On the second day there, I left the hostel to a job interview, and by the time I arrived back to the hostel, late at night, he was seated alone on the front stairs, waiting for me. He told me this like it was the most natural thing on earth. He would buy me snacks, ask me out, try to get information about my personal life. All these things when I already made it clear of my lack of interest in this friendship. All this happened in 3 days. I was exhausted of his presence, but what I didn't know is that it could have went worse. As soon as one of the guys that was sharing the dorm with me left, he asked the hostel staff to switch dorms so he could stay in the same one as me. Obviously, he didn't tell me this, so imagine how surprised and disgusted I was when I saw him coming into the dorm with all his belongings. I was so scared of his presence that I slept wearing jeans to avoid any sort of advantage that he could take while I was sleeping. The very next morning I decided to leave. The situation had got worse, and I couldn't handle it anymore. While I was packing, the guy showed up, noticed what I was doing, and started to cry, asking me not to leave him. Then, to make things even more creepy and disgusting, he told me that he would miss seeing my face while I was sleeping, and thank God that he had taken photos. I was trying my best to stay calm, but I lost it when he told me he had taken pictures of me while I was sleeping. I took his phone out of his hand and asked him to see the pictures, and deleted all of them. There were a bunch of photos of me sleeping in the night before. I left the hostel, and I really regret not reporting him to the staff. Crazy lonely dude in the hostel, please, let's never meet again.
My first true crime novel was published in early 2011. The book followed the 4-year career of a serial killer in southern Illinois, covering the grisly details of his murders and eventually ending with his arrest. The book was absolutely perfect. I poured hundreds of hours into research, interviews, and writing. I was convinced that it was a sure ticket into a life as a famous author. My publisher had other plans. They claimed that money was far too tight and that they had to cancel my marketing campaign. It was just a coincidence that they abandoned me just as they pushed hundreds of thousands of dollars resources towards another author. So of course, my novel failed. Of course, no one bought it. And if there's one thing publishers avoid more than unpublished amateurs, it's authors with a single failed book. I've spent the last few years trying to cobble something together that might convince them to give me another chance. When I heard about a string of murders in my town, it seemed the perfect opportunity for a comeback. I poured myself another glass of whiskey by the light of my computer monitor. My ice cube had melted 3 glasses back, but no matter. I couldn't slow my research into the killer's background, his victims, his method of murder, all of it. I took a sip as I reread another police report. The killer had used a fire axe to commit the crimes. Very gory. That was good. Gory murders always sell better than boring firearm-related crimes. Even better was the fact that he'd killed families instead of single people. That was yet another angle I could exploit. I clicked on a news clip from the night he'd been arrested. The best part of this case was the fact that the lunatic had turned himself in. I drained the rest of my glass, already planning what I write about that. Family serial killer with a conscience? I made a list of names to contact the next day. The police raid on the killer's apartment had been highly publicized, so I knew exactly where he lived. I looked up the landlord who owned the apartment complex and wrote his number down on a little notebook I carry around with me. A few well-placed lies might get me a tour of the killer's private quarters. I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache and nausea. But I didn't let that slow me down. I rolled over, took a shower, and went out to meet with the landlord of the apartment. He was a tall, portly man in his late 40s. He seemed friendly and more than a little stupid. He unlocked the door for me and showed me a few of the rooms. The apartment had been almost completely cleared out by someone. I guess first the police and then the movers. I nodded along as the landlord continued the tour of the apartment, showing me the kitchen, then the master bedroom. I knew the killer had a habit of hiding bodies inside crawl spaces from my research, and was on the lookout for them. I noticed a vent in the corner of the master bedroom that looked to be pressure fit into the wall. Seems like a great place, just the kind of thing I've been looking for, I said, wiping away the post-drinking sweats that were growing on my forehead. You mind if I use the bathroom before we finish here? The landlord pointed to the master bathroom. Be my guest. I purposefully spent a long time in there, hoping he'd leave the bedroom. I was rewarded when he called out, "I'll be by my car downstairs when you're finished." I left the bathroom and crept up to the vent. I pulled hard on the metal and was rewarded as it slid smoothly from the wall. Inside was a space about 2 feet wide and 1 foot tall. It extended back into the darkness for several feet at least. And there, lying in the dust on the metal floor, was a leather-bound notebook. I snatched it from the ground, hardly believing my luck. It was thick and well used, but I stuffed it inside my shirt for the time being. Replacing the metal grate was harder than pulling it off, but I managed it without making too much noise. I returned to the landlord outside, turning to look up at the small apartment. "I'm gonna be honest with you," I said. "How's that?" he asked, confused. "I'm Jim Sullivan, a true crime novelist," I said. "I'm here to find out if there's anything interesting left about your most recently departed tenant." The landlord's face clouded over with anger. "So this was a waste of my time then? I was wondering if you had any information about not for liars. Get off my property. I never want to see you here again." I thanked him and returned to my car, my mind already on nothing but the thick leather booklet inside my shirt. I rushed home, guarding the notebook like a goose with a golden egg. I prepared my desk with a spiral notebook and a blue pen ready by my right hand. Then, trembling, I opened the notebook. It was far better and far worse than I could have ever imagined. The killer had written his planning of the murders in excruciating detail. He explained how he watched the houses, how he waited to see whether or not the husbands loved their wives, whether or not the children were disobedient, what kind of dinners they ate, and at what time. He must have stalked them for days beforehand. But the details in the planning were nothing to the details in describing the murders themselves. I had to pause halfway through reading one account. He kept describing the look on the father's face as his wife died. I poured myself a tall drink, drained it, then poured myself another. The killer languished in the description of their cries, their last dying moments, their pitiful supplication for mercy. I finished the bottle before I finished the notebook. After his account of the 4th family murder, the pages of the book finally, mercifully, went blank. When he finished describing the desecration of the last corpse, I closed the book with trembling fingers. My head throbbed with alcohol and the horrible images racing through my mind, but I couldn't help but hold my hands to my mouth in joy. What a find! What a treasure trove of information! 100 years of interviews couldn't give me what this one book had just dropped into my lap. I was going to be famous again! I laughed out loud into the empty room, picked up the already empty bottle of whiskey to my lips, and licked at the last drop before walking to my bedroom. I woke up late the next afternoon feeling woozy. I felt something worse than a hangover. Must have drunk more than I'd been planning to. But could anyone really blame me, reading those horrible things I'd read? No, Of course, no one could blame me. In fact, no one could blame me if I had another drink right now to ease this horrible throbbing in my skull. I got to my feet and walked to the kitchen. I cracked open a beer before walking back to my desk. The notebook caught my eyes as I passed. It was different, somehow thicker. I picked it up and realized that my blue pen had been lodged inside of the leather-bound notebook. I opened it up and saw a brand new entry that hadn't been there the night before. I sat down at the desk, trying to make sense of this new entry, written in a different handwriting from the others. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was reading. I read, in similar meticulous detail, how I had gone to a house up in the mountains and killed a young couple on their honeymoon. I read about how I'd killed the husband and that I had taken the wife's body back with me. I immediately jumped to my feet and ran to my computer, Googling the address furiously. Had I written this in some kind of murder and alcohol-induced sleepwalking? The address was real. It was a house just a half hour away, and there were no news articles about any murders in the area. My breathing continued to quicken as I stared at the house. The descriptions from the notebook matched it perfectly. It wasn't necessarily my handwriting, but there's no doubt it was different from the other entries, and it had been written with my pen. I Googled the nearest payphone, marked the location, and drove there. I dialed 911 with a gloved hand. 911, what's your emergency? A voice on the other end asked. Can you send someone over to a house for me? I'm concerned that something bad may have happened. Sir, what do you... I cut her off, instead passing the address. Did you get that? I asked. She said. I read the address again, then hung up. I drove back to my house, thinking hard the entire way. God, I needed a drink. My garage door opened up and I drove inside. It was only then that I noticed the axe on the ground. I closed the garage door and rounded my car. An unfamiliar axe lay on the ground beside the door to my house. I knelt down and picked it up to inspect it. The metal head was crusted with a layer of blood and hair. I stumbled back, holding my hand to my mouth. When no monster leapt from the darkness, I dropped the axe to the floor and walked inside to open another bottle. I spent the next hour constantly refreshing the news and praying for what must have been the first time in years. Please, I begged. Please let this be some big misunderstanding. Please. It only took 3 hours before the double homicide was front page news. I was already in an alcohol-fueled haze at that point. Every single detail was correct. Husband dead, wife missing. I realized then that I hadn't looked around my house. The wife's body was somewhere after all. Wouldn't she be in the house of her killer? The notebook had been silent on her final location. I spent the next hour looking through my house for places where I may have stashed her body, but came up short. A strange, bizarre revulsion to the notebook came over me. It had caused this. I wasn't sure how, but I knew that if I'd never picked it up, I wouldn't have had that axe in my garage, nor a conscience so weighted down by... No, that wasn't possible. I had to get rid of it. I briefly considered burning the notebook, but rejected the idea. No. Something told me that the book belonged back in the apartment where I found it. I drank a shot of espresso to sober up, then started walking. The apartment was just a few blocks away, and I figured I'd already killed enough people for one day. The night was cold, but I barely felt the chill through the haze of guilt, confusion, and fear. I reached the killer's apartment 20 minutes later. One of the windows on the ground floor was unlocked, which allowed me to slide inside. I closed it behind me and looked around at the apartment. The other killer had turned himself in, hadn't he? He'd had a conscience. My mouth turned down into a snarl. It wasn't my fault, even if I did do it. It was the damn notebook. I pulled it out and threw it onto the ground. After a moment of hesitation, I scooped it back up and walked up the dark stairs to the master bedroom. It was the same as I'd left it the day before, though the vent looked off. Maybe the landlord had noticed I'd messed with it. No matter. I knelt down and pulled hard on the vent, earning a cut on my thumb as the metal slid free. I reached down and grabbed the notebook, then extended my arm into the darkness where I hit something soft and wet. I flipped on my phone's light and saw the body of a woman lying inside, covered in enough blood to leave the scent of iron in the air. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of it. Surely I hadn't killed this woman, then driven to the house, right? Then my thought from earlier returned to me. The woman's body was almost certainly on the killer's property. The front door of the apartment below me opened with a crash. I spun and backed up, still on my hands and knees, as the sound of slow, steady footsteps climbed up the stairs. The bedroom door opened and the light flicked on. The landlord I'd met the other day stood in the doorway holding an axe covered in still wet blood. "Well, I'm sad to say you weren't at home this time," he said, gripping the head of the axe with a beefy fist. "You're probably wondering what the hell's going on. Am I right?" He pointed the handle of the axe towards me. "Am I right?" I nodded slowly, my mind racing. He hefted the axe in his hands. "There's just something about convincing other people that they're killers. Not even the light leaving someone's eyes gives me the rush I felt when that poor sap turned himself in. Sorry, liar. You just happened to be the next to pick up the book. But you made it easy. You even gave me your name. Looks like I'll have to leave that notebook out for someone else to find. Maybe a detective will wake up to find he's killed his wife. What do you think?" He took a step into the room. I jumped to my feet and ran for the bathroom. I knew from my time there earlier that it had a window. I'd only made it a few feet before the axe slammed into the back of my left arm. I ignored the pain and leapt at the window, crossed my arms into an X, and crashed through the glass. The fall was just long enough for me to reflect on my poor decisions before I hit the ground. A dozen things inside me broke with the impact, but that wasn't what worried me. What worried me was that I'd hear heavy footsteps again. But I didn't hear footsteps. I heard a cry of surprise. A young couple ran over to me. "Are you okay?" the man shouted. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was the wife calling the police. I'll skip over my stay in the hospital, the police's fruitless search for the landlord, and my panic attacks. They still haven't found him, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep until they do. I let the police take copies of the notebook, but I still own the original. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I still occasionally check the ending to make sure no new entries have shown up. This story was written by David Feuling. When I first started sleepwalking, my wife mostly found it funny. She stays up much later than I do in the evenings. Apparently, I've started finding my way to her home office just down the hall from our bedroom. If I can even remember these encounters at all, then it's only ever in hazy snippets. "You flirt with me," she insisted. I didn't like to hear this, because to me it was someone else inside my body. From my perspective, something weird and embarrassing was happening to us both on these nights. "What do I say?" I asked her. "It's just gibberish," she answered, then laughed. "But your body language is definitely like you're trying to be really smooth. You're trying to talk me up." "If it happens again," I insisted, "please wake me or take me back to bed." "Babe, I promise it's okay," my wife smiled. "It's cute and it's harmless." She wouldn't feel this way for long. I tried home remedies at first. I maintained good sleep hygiene and abstained from alcohol. Nothing worked though, and so I became frustrated. It got bad enough that I started using the terry cloth sash from my bathrobe to tie myself to our bed frame. It sounds silly, but it worked, at least for a while. I double knot the sash around my right ankle. The other end was wrapped securely around the leg of the metal bedpost. If I tried to leave the mattress, I'd have to carefully undo the knots to free myself. That was fine, because I'd wake up as my brain struggled to find the knot's weak spot. Things became disturbing when my sleepwalking body discovered a new way to get free. I can only remember the end of the event. My wife's fearful face broke through the reverie, and I felt a sense of deep shame. That's what woke me up. She says that I tried to flirt with her again, but this time I was carrying scissors in my hand. I had cornered her in her office, and she could do nothing but pray I decided to leave her alone. I didn't seem aware I was holding anything. When her fearful expression stirred me awake, we returned to the bedroom, and it became clear what had happened. "You rolled out of bed and onto the floor," my wife whispered with some astonishment. "You were still connected by your ankle." She pointed at the severed rope sash trailing from the bed frame's leg. "You must have reached into my sewing dresser, searched through it, and found scissors to cut yourself free." Indeed, around my ankle remained the other knotted half of the rope sash. My wife and I talked earnestly about our concerns the next day. "I hate that I do it," I told her. "Can't you please just shake me awake as soon as I bother you?" "You were carrying scissors!" she exclaimed. "Anything might have happened. Haven't you heard about never trying to wake up a sleepwalker? What if you became violent?" "I know," I said. I felt intensely guilty. I've heard that before too, but look, I woke up randomly last night and nothing bad happened. It's the same as when I tried to untie my ankle. I never lashed out. I think you should wake me. The dangerous part is when I'm still asleep. I'll try it, she finally agreed, but please make an appointment with a doctor right now. I will, I nodded. She was right. The home remedies clearly weren't enough. I made an appointment with a sleep clinic for the soonest possible date. It was 2 weeks away. We moved all sharp objects out of reach from the bed, and I bought a new piece of fabric to restrain my ankle as we'd done before. I hoped it would be enough until my appointment arrived. The worst part of sleepwalking is that I genuinely don't remember anything until my mind starts to awaken. Sometimes this occurs in response to a stimulus, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. Each episode usually results in a vague but humiliating memory of my wife either laughing at me or looking very afraid. Sometimes I don't remember anything at all. My only clue is when someone tells me or I notice something has changed. On the night before my sleep clinic appointment, I went to bed and woke up feeling completely normal. There were no new memories. Abruptly, I realized that I'd gone to bed in pajamas but was now wearing only underwear. When I inspected my body, I found several deep bruises on my arms. There was also a bad friction burn on my ankle. Something serious just happened. It was early on a Sunday morning, so I sat alone and worried while I waited for my wife to wake up naturally. I didn't want to disturb her rest any more than I already had. I felt an awful sort of trepidation. I badly wanted to ask what happened, but I was also dreadfully afraid to actually know it. When my wife finally awoke, she seemed very strangely shy. She wasn't angry, but she also didn't want to talk to me at all. Please, honey, I implored her. I need to know. Was it worse than usual? How did I get my ankle free from the bed? You don't remember anything? She asked tentatively. There was real fear in her eyes now, and I hated myself for giving her that feeling. Usually you at least remember how it ends. I'm so sorry. I felt tears welling in my eyes. I didn't even know anything happened until I realized my pajamas were gone. Well, if you really don't remember, then I don't want to talk about it at all. Let's just both forget it entirely. She wouldn't budge, and the tension between us lasted all day. I'm just glad you're going to the clinic. That was the only thing my wife would say to me. She'd repeat it whenever I tried to engage her. It was an overnight stay at the sleep clinic. They prepared a cozy and safely furnished bedroom from which to monitor me. In addition to tracking my vitals, there would also be a video recording for us to review in the morning. Behind a one-way mirror, a sole technician would watch to ensure that I didn't hurt myself or do anything dangerous. I awoke the next morning with only one faint, new memory. I remember standing in front of the one-way mirror and tracking the dim shape of a person behind the glass with my eyes. The technician confirmed that I watched him carefully and shifted my gaze whenever he moved. My memory of that only lasted a few seconds, but the video showed there was much more to it. The footage showed everything. I sat up in my bed around midnight, then worked dutifully at the knot around my ankle. It sometimes takes me about 45 seconds to untie myself when I'm already awake, but that night I stared and worked blindly at it for more than 13 minutes. With patient random tugs at the outside of the knot, I set myself free. Now standing, I walked directly to the one-way mirror. I got close enough that I was nearly pressing my nose against it. That's when I began tracking the technician with my eyes as the faint shadow of his body moved behind the tinted glass. I stood and stared for 3.5 hours, then returned to bed. I only spoke at the end, just before I swayed to turn my back on the technician. I spoke a few lines of gibberish. After that, I started humming loudly. The tune was Just the Two of Us. That old song from the 80s. The camera caught my face twisting itself into a very sinister smile as I did so. As I lowered myself back into the bed, I called out loudly, "Just so lucky I can't get you." What the fuck? I've never threatened anyone in my life. I'm terrible at even pretending to be intimidating when I'm awake. Now I'm staring down strangers and meditating on how they've been left alone with me? Why would I say that my forced isolation was lucky for the technician? What the hell was I planning? The doctors wrote me a prescription that really helped, and I honestly thought that was the end of my story. I took one pill at the end of each evening, and they never failed to put me into a deep and uneventful sleep. There were no more weird nights or awkward discoveries in the morning. My wife even started to trust me the way she used to. She'd laugh and grin when we talked again. It was such a relief. We'd had a rough patch, but now it seemed to be behind us. "Maybe we should crack a few beers, hun," my wife told me as we sat down to dinner last night. "Or we could open a bottle of wine?" Her friendly smile made my heart feel safe. No more sleepwalking means we can enjoy a few drinks together again. My wife shot me a playful look and grabbed a corkscrew. It was true, I'd missed drinking a bit. I agreed and we drank and laughed while eating our meal. It was a lovely evening, but my tolerance for alcohol was low. I had accidentally gotten myself drunk by the end of the night. Around 10 p.m. I collapsed into our bed, completely forgetting to take my pill and tie my ankle to the bed frame. I awoke this morning with no new memories. The only clues that I've been sleepwalking are the things that have changed. My wife isn't in bed beside me. I search my mind but find absolutely no clues. Last night was a perfect blackout. Looking down, I see the crimson fingernail scratches all over my arms and chest. I touch my face and find more deep abrasions there too. My neck is bleeding slightly, and there's an aching tenderness in my right eye. I must have been struck in the face, at least once, hard. Someone was struggling to make me let go of them, and that struggle seems to have lasted for a long while before it ended. It's 7 a.m., and my wife isn't asleep in the bed next to me. In the back of my head is a feeling that I can almost taste in my mouth. A sour flood of terror and shame runs a circuit through my whole body. I realize that whatever I did is already done. There's no stopping it, and no taking it back. That awful sort of trepidation returns. I want to ask, what happened? But I'm also dreadfully afraid to actually know. The only words I can think of now are, "Oh my God. What did I do?" This time, though, I think I can guess. I've shouted her name several times, loud enough that anyone in the house should be able to hear it. I'm too paralyzed by fear to open the door and leave the bedroom. Every second before the terrible answer becomes one more second of blissful ignorance. Please, God, tell me I'm still dreaming.
My name is Andrew, and I was 15 at the time this happened. I was new in school and had just met some two guys that, for privacy reasons, will go by the names Josh and Jacob. They were cool kids, and the day I met them, we bonded so well that around lunchtime, Josh told us about an abandoned house that was a couple of miles away from school, saying it was supposedly haunted and that we should visit it after school. Me and Jacob both laughed it off, telling him in the nicest way possible to say, "That's stupid." But eventually Josh got us intrigued because his and Jacob's parents weren't home that day. My parents were going to be watching football with my neighbors, so I figured it was a potential plan. At around 9 p.m., I get a message from Jacob saying, "Dude, get dressed and meet me outside your house." I eventually got up and walked outside, seeing both Jacob and Josh waiting on my front porch with their phones and flashlights. "What the hell?" I said, confused. "Why did you bring flashlights?" Jacob and Josh looked at each other, then back at me. "We're going to break in the abandoned house by Rail Point Road." No, I said to them. "We can't break into an abandoned house. We could get in serious trouble." We started having an argument, and long story short, they got me to go with them. We all hopped on our bikes and started following each other to the house. We stopped to overlook what seemed to be an old and rusty house with a cracked window on the second floor. Josh enthusiastically got off his bike and tried to open the door, starting to get mad that it was locked. "Damn old door," Josh yelled, getting a splinter in his left hand. "I got it," Jacob said, putting a cloth on his arm and breaking the glass next to the door, unlocking the door and opening it. We walked in the house and we all stopped and realized it smelled like rotten milk, and the walls had stains and bugs crawling, and the furniture had mold. We all looked around when we suddenly heard a loud slam coming from upstairs. "Hello?" Jacob said, walking up the stairs with me. The floorboards were horribly damaged. When we got to the top, one of the doors started to bang violently. Over and over again, the door banged. As soon as me and my friends were gonna leave, a loud and grouchy voice yelled, "Get out of my home," eventually screaming like a deranged man. We were gonna leave, but Jacob and Josh were gone. They vanished. I quickly hid in the closet and heard the loud bangs and screams coming from the man getting closer. The man busted through the door and started to throw things and scream from the top of his lungs. "Where are you?" I was so scared I felt like I was gonna cry, but I somehow stayed silent. The man stopped and walked out of the room. I got out of the closet and eventually jumped out the window. When I got out from the window, I started to run, and as I looked back at the broken window, I saw the man's face smiling with his big, bulgy eyes and his huge, crooked teeth. I got on my bike and just sped home. Ever since then, I never saw Jacob and Josh again. Never showed up to school those days. Till I got a package, and it was a bloody shirt that had a note on it that said, "Miss me yet?"
It only started a little while ago, but I fear it's getting much worse. My dad has started alternating between two faces that couldn't be more different. The first one has brown eyes just like mine, glasses that are much bigger than mine, and a beard that I won't be able to grow for at least 5 more years, as he says. When Dad wears his bearded face, we look a lot alike, although he is convinced that I'm the spitting image of my mother. I'm not sure if that's true. Mom passed away when I was still in kindergarten, and I avoid looking at old photos. In them, there are none of her and Dad's second face, and it reminds me of a time that I'm sure was much better than the one we have now. The new face is harder to describe because a regular mind has difficulties interpreting it. It almost looks like a new layer of a gray texture with dark veins was vacuum sealed on a skull. It compares to skin in some ways, it can sweat, and it slightly trembles when he speaks. The sound he makes are muffled and hard to understand because there is no hole cut in for his mouth. There's none for his nose either, but I can still hear him breathing underneath. The only thing that is exposed is 2 holes cut into the upper half functioning as eyes. Luckily, I don't see the second face very often. He can change back to the old one and does so most of the time, but an image like that is hard to forget. I know this sounds entirely absurd and terrifying, but my dad is all I have, and he's not evil. Bad people did this to him. Dad used to gamble a lot and owed some people money. It's not something we talk about, but I picked it up through little clues. After Mom's death, he went through a hard time, but I swear that he has always cared about me in the ways that he knew how to. We don't have any other family, just each other. The gambling ended very abruptly. I wish I could have been happy about it, but what came after was much worse. That's when the seed for the new face was put into the soil. One evening, my dad was pacing through our apartment, mumbling things to himself. "Fuck. Shit. He'll kill me. Soren will kill me." Then he looked at me, brown eyes wide open. "Do you have a friend you can stay with tonight, buddy?" I would have loved to do that, but my friends and even their parents were probably all asleep. "No, it's too late for that," he mumbled to himself again. "Go to your room, lock the door, and go to bed. I have to go out and take care of something. You're 12 now. You can do this, right?" I nodded, but before I could even move, there was a knock on the door. From the look on Dad's face, I could tell these weren't visitors he was happy about. After that knock, a number of things happened. Dad rushed me to my room, which I locked from the inside. He told me to go climb in my closet, which I didn't. I sat down right next to the door. A few seconds later, our front door slammed open. I expected noise, shouting, crying maybe. But it was eerily silent. All I heard was the occasional whimper of my dad. I felt so helpless. A man spoke words in a language that I didn't understand. After that, there was only silence until finally the front door opened and closed again. For hours, I was too afraid to leave my room, but when I finally did, it was morning. I tiptoed towards the kitchen where Dad was having cereal. He smiled when he saw me, wearing his regular face. Everything seemed normal. It wasn't visible at first, but after that night, my dad had changed. At first, I only caught glimpses of it. The first time I saw it for a second in the window at night and was sure I imagined it, but then I saw it in the bathroom mirror, in his dark teacup, and sometimes in my dreams. The shape that trembles and breathes with no mouth. It was fine as long as it was only in the mirror, but as time progressed, it started growing outside the mirror. Now his face changes at least one night a week, and it stays for hours. I don't know what happened that night, only that I now spend a lot of time locked up in my room. The description of the second face, I realize, resembles a mask in many ways, but it isn't. And the reason I know that for sure is that one night when Dad was sleeping or appeared to be sleeping, I tried to take it off. I was sick of it. I hated the other face. I wanted to see my regular Dad again, but it was impossible. It wouldn't move, but when he felt my hands on his new skin, his eyes opened wide and he gave me the sign. We never discussed the sign. He never speaks of it when he wears his other face. It's just something that I learned. When he pushes his fingernails into the palm of his hand, it means that I should run to my room and lock myself inside. It's the only way he's able to communicate freely when the other thing takes over. He tries to protect me, even in that unimaginable state. It usually only happens when we have odd guests in our home or before he leaves to take care of something and doesn't come back before the sun. As it only comes out at night, I can avoid it most of the time. The few times that I have witnessed it, I'd rather try and forget. He came into my room only one time. His hands were all bloody and he stained my white sheets. I kept my eyes closed and tried to ignore the muffled breath underneath his new layer of skin. I tried to hold my breath as long as I could so he wouldn't notice how scared I was. After a few minutes, I finally heard the door close again. One night, I thought he wasn't even at home. I got up to go to the bathroom. I had to go so bad I thought I'd wet myself. When I opened my door, he stood there right in front of it. No mouth, no nose, only two small cuts for eyes. He made noises as if he was trying to speak, but no real words came out. It was a terrifying sight, but he never tried to attack me, and I'd simply learned to lock my room every night and stop drinking anything before going to bed. In the morning, he'd always have his other face back and be a pretty decent dad. He really was trying. It took me a while to understand what happened and why the dangerous people even did this to him. I thought they were trying to hurt him, but now I know that they weren't punishing him. They were using him as a vassal, a body to carry the face and act on its behalf, to scare victims or do even worse things to them. I know that now because he finally opened up to me. We had dinner together, almost like a regular family sitting around our kitchen table. I can't begin to describe how out of character this is for us. We hardly ever eat together, and if we do, it's usually frozen pizza in front of the TV. Last night, however, Dad cooked. He made baked potatoes, green beans, steak, and even some really nice pepper sauce for the meat. He poured himself a glass of wine, and I had Coke in a fancy glass that I didn't even know we owned. When I had difficulties cutting my steak properly, he helped me without a word. For a few minutes, we sat there silently. I even tried to chew as slowly as possible so I wouldn't be too loud. It felt as if I was having dinner with a stranger, and I had to be on my best behavior. It wasn't really a stranger, though. Dad was wearing his regular face. He even smiled when he caught me staring at him. "You like this better, don't you?" he asked. When I didn't respond, he added, "This face." It felt odd because we never spoke about the obvious issue. I didn't talk to anyone about this, kept it a secret because I was afraid that someone would take away the only parent I had left. I nodded. Of course I preferred his regular face. Dad stuffed a big chunk of meat and potatoes in his mouth. "So do I. This is quite the mess we found ourselves in, isn't it, son?" Again, I only nodded. "Do you even understand it? You're pretty young, right?" "I'm not that young." He looked me up and down. "Well, you're small." He was in a mood. Normally he was only like this after a night of losing, agitated, slightly mean, but not violent. "I'm old enough to know that you've turned into a monster," I hissed. He dropped his fork and grinned. His teeth looked red from the bloody steak. "I'm not a monster, son. I only work for one. Not voluntarily, but if I stop, he brings me incredible pain. He can rip my soul into pieces simply by stating my name. At least that's what it feels like." He sighed. "And imagine if he killed me. Who'd take care of you?" I shivered at the thought of my father being murdered, and especially at hearing him talk about that, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "You and I, we get along well, don't we?" I don't mind you being here, I really don't, but sometimes I think it'd be best if you simply left. Ran away. Disappeared. I clenched my fist so that I wouldn't start crying. Dad, what is going on? I whispered. He reached his left arm over the table and put his hand on top of mine. This thing inside me, it's fighting. It wants to take control. It really is a struggle. You see, both of us want to be in charge, and switching back and forth feels numbing. If I could get rid of him, I could do so much more. Then why don't you? Kill it. Kill the thing. We can run away. I don't care about this home. We can get help. We can go to the police. I was practically shouting. I can't kill him. He has a mind of his own, and I'm not sure what would happen to me if I did. His eyes appeared tired and sad for a moment, but then he smiled again. I don't get... I started speaking, but dropped my knife on the ground before I could form a sentence. When I reached under the table to pick it up, I saw that blood was dripping from my father's hand. I don't know how long he'd been digging his nails into his palm. This was the first time this happened, while he was wearing his regular face, which made me realize something. My dad has issues. I'm well aware of that. I'm not trying to defend him. He's messed up often in the past, but when it comes to me, he always tries to be protective. You know, if it weren't for you, I would have gotten rid of him long ago. He keeps fighting for you. It's really frustrating, you know? But I'm glad we finally got to talk. I've tried before, but it's not easy when I don't have a mouth. He didn't simply grow a new face. He became a new person.